Well, actually part of my PhD research is going to be looking comparatively at other conflicts in the past where they didn't have this pre-social media, so the pre-social media age. So I'll be looking at Rwanda in 1994 and also, very interestingly, Hama in Syria, the massacre that happened there in 1982. Because while there was the trickle-down effect and there was some kinds of information coming out, that was more in diplomatic dispatches which had the number of deaths in Hama at 5,000, whereas 13, 14 years later, they were saying it's more like 25,000. So I'm going to be exploring that, looking at would we ever have known about Syria if it wasn't for social media. My main hypothesis is we would know eventually, but we certainly wouldn't know in the level of detail, and we certainly wouldn't have the amount of content which we have now that's depicting, especially visual material, which I've spoken to many people, and it can be argued, specifically stuff that depicts crimes against humanity, things that are massacres. That's not only giving us information about what's happening, but at a later stage, who knows, it could end up being in The Hague as part of evidence in a trial. So I think we might know what's happening, but I don't think we would know anywhere to the extent we do, and we certainly wouldn't be able to report it in the way we have been. In the research that I was doing, I did interviews with a number of staff from different departments in the BBC, and the thing that I asked them is, the BBC obviously strives to be balanced and impartial. How do you achieve that when 90% of the content you're getting is from anti-regime or pro-opposition fighters? And the response I got was largely, we do try, at the start of the conflict, we did have some pro-regime voices, or we do try to have non-aligned people, but as the conflict worsened, those voices trickled away. So my understanding is it's not from lack of trying, it's more been the reluctance of these people to come forward, and they have featured specifically pro-regime voices, or not anti-opposition voices rather, in the UK are more likely to make themselves available. So I have been told that is largely the issue, and as a result, when they do have rebel voices on, they try to set them to task. Like the presenter will say, well, that is your opinion, but obviously there's the other opinion, because it's then up to the BBC to try and strike that balance even with the absence of the voices.
International Olympic Committee Vice President there, Sir Myang-ung, speaking to me a little earlier, and we could actually hear the noise coming out of that Olympic stadium when the closing ceremony was underway. Let's discuss a little further now. I'm pleased to say in the studio with me is Amandeep Bangu, BBC's Olympics reporter, Lisette Johnston, who's just come out of the closing ceremony, BBC producer, and also Ricardo Setchion, member of the Brazilian Olympic delegation 1992, and has also been to 6 Summer Games. We're going to talk to you in a moment about what Rio holds in 2016 as we pass the mantle over to you, of course. But first, Amandeep, let's talk about the legacy of the London Games, because that's what everybody's going to be focusing on now. It's been an incredible 2 weeks, couldn't have gone better for the organising committee. But the attention now will focus on what happens to this area, particularly behind us, in years to come.
Absolutely. UK Prime Minister David Cameron pledged today that the funding that's going to continue until 2014 will be extended to 2016. So that's brilliant news for us looking ahead to Rio. But locals are thinking this Olympic Park, which is built on a wasteland, 7 years ago there was nothing here. Will they get a stake in this as well?
Well, it is day 26 of the Olympic torch relay across the United Kingdom, and today the flame set out from the Scottish University town of St Andrews. It is on its way to the Scottish capital, Edinburgh. We can take you there now live and join Karen, who is there for us. Karen, I know you've got a special guest for us too.
We have got a special guest, Lucy. She will be coming up very shortly. I hope you can hear me above the sound check that's been going on for the last couple of hours here at Edinburgh Castle. The castle in its magnificence is behind us, and they put a stage to the side of it for a special free concert for the people of Edinburgh, because in about 2.5 hours the torch will arrive in the Scottish capital on its way from the north of Scotland right round, as you mentioned, St Andrews a little earlier today. But it has brought with it plenty of excitement about London 2012. The Scots aren't feeling perhaps left out like they might be so many hundreds of miles away from the main games themselves, but it's really been getting people involved. One person was nominated by one of our dear colleagues here at BBC World News, and he was Mike Johnston, to carry the torch around the part of Scotland where his daughter and he are from. Let's just listen in. He was interviewed by Michelle on Impact just a few months ago, back in March this year.
My daughter nominated me. I have been an officer of the Royal British Legion Scotland in my area for more than 20 years. and I have other charity interests in the area, like the Scottish Wild Beaver Group, and I'm a member of the board of a housing association, which is also a charity, obviously.
Lisette, right up.
Well, things didn't go, sadly, to plan, because only 5 weeks after that interview in the Impact studio, Mike sadly passed away very suddenly. His daughter, Lisette, our colleague, as I said, is here with us. Lisette, incredibly sad and unexpected news for you. And what happened? You became the nominee to carry the torch in your father's place.
Yeah, basically, my dad passed away very sadly, very suddenly, as you said, at the end of April. I had chosen to nominate him for a long legacy of charity work. He left the army in 1984, immersed himself in civilian life, was hugely involved with school board, the Royal British Legion, paying his own way to go and be a standard bearer at Wootton Bassett, and I just thought that deserved to be recognised, so I nominated him.
And so, because of the series of events, you became torchbearer in his place, and that took place yesterday in the town of Forfar.
That's right. When I told Lowcock what happened, they said, well, you did nominate him, would you be willing to carry the torch in his memory? And I said, absolutely. My father was so excited about taking part. He was 69 years old. He'd actually been out jogging because he was adamant, I will not walk, I will run with a torch. So all of his friends from his local golf club came, my family came, and it was very sad initially, because I was on the bus with these amazing people who have done so many great deeds and truly deserve to be there. That was, sad, because I know my dad would have loved to have been there. I could imagine him in his white tracksuit, but then actually going out and holding the torch was a different story.
So when you actually got out there, how much of your thoughts were dominated by the fact your dad wasn't there and what he might be thinking?
I think the main thing was when I was on the bus, I just imagined he would have loved the banter on the bus. He would have loved speaking to these people who were sharing their reasons for nomination. But when I got off the bus, you just couldn't be sad, because there was hundreds of people. It's one of the biggest things that's happened in Forfar probably ever, and everyone was just hugely elated. Everybody was cheering, massive support, loads of friends and family there, loads of locals that had come out, everyone with make pretend torches. You couldn't be unhappy, you just felt so honoured to be there.
Yeah, and the torch that you get to keep, what will you be doing with it in his memory?
Well, we've decided, because it's not just my dad who's from the town of Alyth who's running with a torch, another gentleman has also run with a torch, and what's going to happen is the torch is going to go into the local museum in Alyth, which is the town where my dad's from and where I grew up, and they're going to hopefully, I understand, have a plaque with both their names on, and the torch will be lent to them and it will sit there on display.
I'm sure your dad will be very proud indeed. Lisette Johnston, thank you very much, our dear colleague here on BBC World News. As you can see, some very special stories emerging from the torch journey around Britain.
Karen, do tell Lisette we were all watching here in the newsroom. We were so proud of her. There was hardly a dry eye in the newsroom as she ran yesterday.
First of all, Caroline Thompson, thank you very much for speaking to us. We've had a chance to look at the NAO report into the BBC's properties. What do you feel ultimately the BBC has learned from this process?
The key lessons we've learned are that you've got to be very clear when you set up a big project like a building project about how you manage it, how you identify what the benefits are of doing it, and how you make sure you know what the key milestones are and have the proper controls in place so that if changes are needed, they're properly handled, you properly know how much they're going to cost, and you approve them in the right way.
One of the things that the report touched on was Broadcasting House and the first phase of that, which was over budget and has now led to the project being 4 years late. What do you feel were the issues there? What do you feel ultimately went wrong in that phase of the project?
A couple of the subcontractors went bust. There were some really big technical problems around something that's called Regent Street disease, which is about the stone cladding and rotting and so on. So there were things like that, but the project wasn't managed in a way that was robust enough to cope with those sort of changes and differences.
How can we be sure that something like that is not going to happen again in the future? With PQ, the remit for programming changed and the scope of the project changed during its lifetime. So how do we ensure that doesn't happen with another project?
In PQ, although the National Audit Office said they thought there was an overspend, We don't accept that as a finding. We think it's a misunderstanding of the processes of approval, because actually no money was spent until we'd got the complete project defined with all the extra space and the other things, and the digital technology done for it.
Caroline Thompson, thank you very much. It should have been the proudest moment of their lives, but Wednesday's 2-0 defeat in the UEFA Cup final in Manchester left Rangers fans deflated, while others were angry. Riots broke out in the city's Piccadilly Gardens after a big screen which had been scheduled to show the tie against Zenit St Petersburg broke down. One Russian fan was stabbed and more than 30 Rangers supporters were arrested.
Manchester would never ever be given another European final because they can't handle it. Simple as that. Glasgow could handle it, Manchester can't.
It took us all day. We looked so forward to coming into the square to watch a game, and we got there and we did expect. It was great. Then it just didn't happen.
Yeah, I was really disappointed. I walked the city today and it was a great atmosphere and I really enjoyed it, and there were people having a great time. And then I've been in goal control today and I saw when the screen failed in Piccadilly Gardens, which was full, had over 20,000 people in it, fans got very frustrated that obviously a lot of them have been drinking a lot. They began to take it out on the screen, and then they began to take it out on my officers, who've worked incredibly hard. They tried to do the best they could, and obviously they've had to respond to the level of violence they were met with.